Right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Metric Insights here. Mike Smitherman, look after sales and marketing over here. I've got, again, Marius with me. Hi, Marius.
Hello, everyone.
So as usual, lines are muted on here, but obviously this is being recorded on the Bright Talk channel. So we'll send out a link to that, but you can always go to our channel and see this recording afterwards, alongside a whole host of other content that we've done. I'm happy to take questions as we go through this in the Q&A window. And the topic today is looking at how to govern Excel in your BI environments. And with that, we're going to run through some slides and then jump into a bit of a product demo around that as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Marius to start, and he's going to sort of tee this up for us before we jump into the demo.
Thank you, Mike. So I think I've been in business intelligence probably about 25 years. And in that time, probably, worked with hundreds of organizations. And I think almost every single one of them had the goal of kind of minimizing the use of Excel. And then, I remember back in the day, the idea was like, oh, we've got this new, really cool business intelligence tool. It's going to convince people not to use Excel. And that just never works. In that, and the fact is that if you might be spending a lot of your time, if you're on this webinar, you probably care about governance. And so you're probably spending a lot of your time talking about things like lineage and, data classification and how to protect sensitive information in the organization. And in all of those conversations, the elephant in the room is that, Excel is there as a consumption model. And it is, if Excel is not going away. 84% of professionals prefer the familiarity of spreadsheets. These are just a few stats. There's many out there you can find. And more than half of people that have access to BI tools, they still opt to use spreadsheets, right? So the kind of reality, whether we confront it or not, is that Excel is not going away as a BI tool, and therefore it cannot be excluded from the strategy that we have around governance, or at least it can't be excluded if we expect our governance that we apply to be effective. So maybe one place to start as we think about governance of Excel is to think about, why is it that makes Excel so compelling to users? Why is it so addictive, right? And so I think it's really because a few things can be done, but fundamentally it's because you can get satisfaction. You can get results in your analysis often without a lot of effort. It's probably the easiest tool of all the tools to use. A BI tool, traditional BI tool, might take days or to learn. It might take weeks to become, have some kind of level of expertise in it, to have a mastery. Whereas with Excel, everyone feels like they're an expert, whether they are one or not. You can open one up and you can put a formula in, you can add a column, you can kind of create your own analyses in there, bring in a set of data and start analyzing it. It just feels like a very easy to learn and very simple to use, right? Just pivoting capabilities in there, very simple. So it's just that as a tool, it has a very low barrier of entry, and you can kind of learn and use that technology even without necessarily being an expert in it. And as a result, you can often generate very fast results. And probably most importantly, as an analyst, you can do it without requiring a whole bunch of collaboration with a BI team. So if you think about, if I want to create an analysis, and I have the choice between, I can go and I can talk to my BI team about onboarding a data set, creating a data pipeline for it, then go and get on with a Tableau, Power BI team who's doing development, figure out how to get on their backlog and prioritize their tasks, give them requirements, and then go build it in some amount of time. I'm going to get something back, versus, I can just download this data set from somewhere and then start working with it. 9 times out of 10, somebody who's familiar with Excel will just go that route. So because there's, just like when water kind of flows downstream, right? And it's the same kind of idea. As human beings, we always go down the path of least resistance. And for that reason, Excel is just not going to go away. And it's something that, because it's just too compelling. So why do we need to govern these user-generated reports that are built in Excel. Well, the problem with the issue is that if you have a two-class system, if you give your BI content, your reports, the first class treatment of really being thoughtful about, what kind of data classification does it have, and making sure only the certified content gets out there, and making sure that there's, additional information and documentation so that data literacy can be maintained. If you do that, but then all of a sudden, all of your BI, all of this content is created in Excel and being distributed throughout the organization, if that's flying coach, right, then what you're doing is you're creating a chaos within the organization from a governance perspective, right? And this is something that will look very familiar to many of you that don't have governance around Excel, in that there's just different versions of spreadsheets are floating around, right, where people are sending it around, and people are not sure that they're even looking at the latest version as they're working with it. There's no kind of governance around the recency or quality of that data. There's inconsistent distribution. So maybe one group gets that particular spreadsheet one week, and then in the next weekly distribution, a different group gets it. I, as a user, if I'm coming into a group, I don't have the ability to see anything except for the one I just received via email. So I can't go back and see, well, what was the analysis on this thing, 3 months ago, because it's just coming to me via email in kind of an ad hoc way. And then there's no real sense of data quality. There's no vetting that's gone through the process to ensure that I'm only getting the things that are distributed to me that are actually of high quality, that have been checked against other objects, that have been certified. Maybe some analysts are very thoughtful in the Excel documents that they send me, and so therefore, those are high quality. Others maybe less so, and I really have no way of, as a consumer of this content, distinguishing between the stuff that I can really trust and the stuff that I can't, right? And so it's just a very chaotic environment. And even most importantly, there's just this elevated risk around improper access of sensitive data, right? Now think about this for a moment. Think about how much time your organization spends on, doing things around governance, like making sure that which data sets contain PII as an analyst, that the lineage of the source of information as an analyst. Well, that's great for the person that's creating the analysis, but odds are many of your analysts already know if they're dealing with PII data. They have a pretty good understanding of the sensitivity of the data. So great that you're spending time and effort on making sure that you've got governance tools that codify that information. But if that information is not available to the end consumer, if the person who just joined the team is opening up an Excel document for the first time that they've received via email, that person is completely unaware of the level of sensitivity of around that data, there's a pretty high likelihood that they might misuse it, use it in a way that's inconsistent with your governance practices. And all of that wealth of information about what is the classification of how that data should be used, if that's stuck in the data cataloging tool that the analyst is using, well, it's doing you no good when the analyst is consuming the content. When the end user is consuming the content. So let's move on. So we've been talking a little bit about governance. I want to take a step back for a moment and talk about what BI governance is, so that as we have the rest of the conversation, there's a little more context. So first of all, if you think about governance, you by definition, you need to synchronize and bring content into a common platform, right? So you can't have governance if everyone is accessing content in a disparate way across a disparate set of platforms. So the idea, fundamental principle of governance, everything needs to be brought and standardized under a single pane of glass. In some way where it's synchronized, it doesn't require duplication of content or anything like that. So we think of it as a centralized portal, right, for governance. Second, once you have that, you need to have a publishing process that allows just the things that are worthy of sharing across the organization to be elevated, and to be elevated in a way where you've attached the required metadata that your consumer of the information needs to know, so that they know what kind of data classification you're dealing with. So they know from a data literacy perspective, what are the glossary definitions that are applicable to this particular piece of content, etc. And that identifies the certification. If you choose to certify content, having the accountability around, who is it that's standing behind this to say this data is of high quality, it's presented in a way that is consistent with the business rules that we've agreed to as an organization, and so you can trust it as a consumer of it. Then once I've published it, if you're going to have governance, there has to be monitoring, right? So you have to be able to know, well, is anyone really even looking at this, and who is looking at this, and how often? Because those are the important tools to be able to retire content over time if it's no longer being used, and know if it's really having the impact that you expect to have in the publishing process, right? If you're publishing something but no one's looking at it, well, that's a whole bunch of effort that could probably go somewhere else. And then the other aspect is, not just the explicit, how many people are looking at things, but the implicit rather, how many people are looking at things, but also feedback that people tell you, right? So having the ability to be able to measure, what do people really think about that content? Is it something that they feel is highly rated? It's something that they can't live without this document being sent out? Or is it something that, yeah, sure, I get it in my email and maybe I look at it, but it's really not that useful. It's not poorly organized. There are a bunch of different issues with me being able to get value out of that content. So the subjective, the qualitative information that tells you as the content publisher whether you've really hit the mark in the content you created and are generating value for the consumers of that content. And then all of that, right, needs to culminate in a process someplace where you can basically exercise change management, identify what should be retired, what content should be promoted because, hey, this is actually valuable, but people don't know much about it. And then what content should be deprecated because, it's no longer being used. And then from a metadata management perspective, on some periodic basis, handling things like attestation to be able to say, well, does this data classification still apply to this particular piece of content 6 months from now, a year from now, having it go through a process like that so that you're keeping that fresh and relevant as the content is evolving. So what are the keys to establishing successful governance, especially when you think about something like user-generated content, like Excel, where it's very lightweight to create that, right? So first and foremost, you have to have a governance process that's really easy, right? You can't have a cumbersome governance process applied to a user-generated report that's easy to produce and expect to have a positive outcome there. That's just not going to work. So clearly, it has to be very lightweight from the perspective of what you're expecting the publisher of the content to do. Next, it needs to be something that supports versioning. So all of these assets, these user-generated reports that people create in Excel and send around the organization, oftentimes, if they're valuable, they have a periodicity to them in the distribution, right? For example, maybe I'm going to send a spreadsheet out to a team of folks telling them how they're doing relative to their budget, right? So as an analyst, I create that spreadsheet every month, and I send it out to everyone all the leads in the organization or department managers telling them how they're performing relative to their budget. Well, so that's great. Any kind of publishing process around metadata, classification, glossary definitions, anything I want to do around metadata for that, I should just have to do that once. And then all versions of that should inherit that metadata. So don't make me go through a publishing process every month, reapplying the same information, right? Capture metadata once, reuse it across versions. And then most importantly, whatever metadata process you have, it must add value to the content publisher. And this is like a really key thing that people miss very often. It's one, I believe it is probably the number one reason why governance initiatives fail. Because in a typical governance initiative, the value accrues to the organization as a whole, you're governing, which is great, and it maybe accrues to the folks that are managing the governance program, and or to the users of the content, right? The people that are benefiting from the governance that's been applied to the content. But very seldom does value accrue to the publisher of the content, right? I, as an analyst, I don't know of any organizations where performance assessments look and say, well, how much how well did you do with your data governance, right? It's usually, how many analyses did I generate? Were those analyses valuable? What's my throughput and volume and quality of work that I'm producing? So for me, if I'm going to be allocating time to a governance process, it's important that since that's not going to be a measurement that's going to be done where somebody's going to be looking at it come performance time, it needs to be something that speeds things up for me in other areas. It needs to make my life easier in some way, so that I'm not only benefiting the organization in an altruistic way, but I'm also benefiting myself and my own experience. Right? And that's pivotal to success. So what does that mean? Well, for making it easy, you absolutely have to have, it needs to feel like a one-step, minimal number click publishing workflow. So I need to be able to have, as soon as I share that content out, whether it's in SharePoint or Share Drive or wherever it is, it needs to pop up into the governance process, be available, and then I can, should be able to click, enter a little bit of metadata, a single screen, put in a description, put in tags, put in whatever metadata is required around data classification, other minimal amount of information that is required to meet the governance criteria for that asset. Hit the button, and then it should be published and available as a governed piece of content. So super lightweight from the content publisher perspective, so that there's minimal friction to getting this content put in place. Then I need retaining metadata across versions, right? So I should be able to publish that content, publish that analysis, and irrespective of whether there's just one version of that or there's a version every month, I should only have to specify that metadata once. Description doesn't change, the categorization doesn't change, the sensitivity doesn't change. Do it once and then inherit it for all the other value. You continuously generate value from that publishing process. And then for myself, for me as the content publisher, what's the value? What's the user added value that we create? Well, so we need to make sure that we enhance the consumption experience in a way that makes my life easier. So for example, collaboration is often a challenge, right? If I want to collaborate with my users around a piece of content, that's always happening over email. They only have access to the analysis that I might have shared with them in that last email. So making it possible for me to log my collaborations, my insights as an analyst in one place, and then have other people share it makes my life easier. And then be able to people even comment on it in the same place and share around it. That's one area. Second, we want to make distribution easier. So again, if I'm going to distribute content, I need to think about who I need to distribute it. I have a little distribution list. Did somebody new join the team? I sent Frank this email last month. Is he still there, or is he no longer there? Maybe you should no longer receive it because he moved on to another team. Taking that whole process off of my shoulders, so that as soon as there's a new version of content, it just gets published out there and automatically goes to the right distribution team. And as people are added or removed from various organization units within your enterprise, within the AED groups, that automatically is translated into who receives and consumes that content. That's a key value add. And then the third piece is managing that usage and feedback part of the process, right? As an analyst, if I want to find out how people feel about my content, I've got to go have meetings or send out surveys. And if I want to figure out usage, well, good luck with that. How am I going to know who's using Excel? I want to be able to have a governance platform that if it helps me understand, here's who's using this content, here's how often they're using it, and oh, by the way, here's some feedback they shared with me. That really helps me as an analyst improve how I do analysis in the future, how I think about what I should create or what content is actually useful. So with that, I'm going to transition to Mike so I can show you what this actually looks like in action.
Yeah, thanks, Marius. So I'm going to just switch over my screen share here. Give me 1 second, and we'll take a look at how some of this materializes in the Metric Insights environment, some of the things that Marius has been talking about. So let me share my window here. Okay. So as Marius said, so the first piece of this from a product perspective, I guess, is, in order to govern BI wherever that might exist, you kind of need to do it in one place. There isn't really a concept of governance in silos. It just doesn't work. So, as we mentioned in the slides, if you're going to give your BI tools a sort of first-class experience, you need to do the same for Excel or indeed any other sort of documents that you classify as quote-unquote BI, and it should all be under the same umbrella. And so what we're going to look at here is the concept of the Metric Insights portal, which is what's on the screen here. Where it's really sort of one place to bring together content from your different BI tools, including Excel, to organize it in a single place under a single category structure, but also give users one place to come and access that content that has been governed and published in there. And we're going to focus on sort of Excel as an example today, but you'll see that it applies to all your BI tools. And so, what we want to discuss is this concept of you having sort of reports published in Excel that you want to make available to your end users. And reality is those reports might be anywhere, right? They might be out on a file store somewhere. They might be out in SharePoint, OneDrive. Wherever those reports are, we want to leave them there, and we want to essentially be able to connect to those reports to govern them. So in our example, I have a bunch of files out on our OneDrive, which represent sort of Excel spreadsheets that we're publishing and making available to our end users. And the first thing that we want to be able to do is make a connection into that file store. So in Metric Insights, that basically relates to this concept of a plugin, a data source, where I'm going out to a particular file store. In this case, again, it's on OneDrive. And what our plugin is doing is basically looking at all the spreadsheets, in this case, or all the documents that exist on that file store that we want to make use of in terms of publishing to our end users. So out on this drive, I've got multiple reports, multiple versions of the same report, as Marius said, and we want to be able to take that content and publish it in an effective way. So step one is, we don't want to have to create copies of these spreadsheets to get them into the portal. It just creates more clutter, right? We want to leave them where they are and be able to govern and link to them in that place. Once we've recognized what reports are out there, we then need this idea of a publishing process to get them into the portal, to get them into the catalog. And so what does that look like? Well, it's, again, the ability to have the portal recognize when new reports and dashboards are created, in this case in Excel, so new documents become available, and give the publisher of that content a very easy way of setting the relevant level of sort of metadata, applying the relevant level of governance to that content before it ultimately gets certified and published into the portal alongside the other content. So here what you're looking at is the concept of a very simple workflow. It effectively has one sort of in progress step. And so what's happening in the platform is, as new content gets added, in this case to our OneDrive, our file store, it gets picked up by Metric Insights and assigned to the owner of that particular piece of content. So in this case, we have a financial reporting spreadsheet here. It's been assigned to me here. I can go in and review that piece of content, but I can also set the necessary metadata that has been deemed necessary for this content. So in this case, as an example, we've got a financial report here. We've deemed it necessary that we need to classify this content in terms of what sort of data it contains. So in this case, it's probably confidential and internal to the organization. And in this case, it probably doesn't contain any PII data. But what fields you have within your organization is going to be based around what business you're running and what makes sense. But you should pick what it is that's required to be set based on the content that is coming in, and just set that and no more. So in this case, I can come in, I can classify the data very easily. I may add additional things like tagging or glossary terms or update descriptions for this, but effectively it should be very quick for me to come in to add that necessary metadata and push that out into the portal. So when I save that, it gets moved into the completed stage, it gets certified and pushed out to the catalog that we'll look at in a minute. So connect to the spreadsheets that are out there, have a simple way of publishing them so that effectively then we end up with a piece of content within the portal where we started. And if we just drill into this in a bit more detail now, what you're looking at here is each of these tiles is effectively linked to a bit of content that we've published from whatever BI tools. So alongside that financial Excel sheet that we just published and another one that represents a marketing dashboard, we also have content coming from our BI tools. And really to the end user, they shouldn't really care where this content is ultimately coming from. I should be able to access it and search for it in a single place. And as a user, I should be able to benefit from that metadata and that governance that has happened. So if we click into something like this monthly marketing update, I get a preview of this content. So here's an image that we capture of what the spreadsheet looks like each time it updates. I get the who certified this, John, and who was responsible for it and when that got certified last. I've got the classification of that content. So, how should it be used? Does it contain sensitive information? It may be tagged with things like glossary terms that you might do for your other BI content. So in this case, it's a marketing spreadsheet that contains information about website traffic, how that's calculated, what it includes, who owns those definitions. And as a user, even though it's a spreadsheet in this case, I get the context around how this particular report should be used, and I can trust in it because I know it's been certified. And if it's something I want to look at, I should be able to sort of see almost sort of a preview of that spreadsheet. But it is the up-to-date spreadsheet. We PDF it. We obviously don't want people to be able to change these governed versions of content. So I can come in and see the latest version and see all the sheets associated with it. I should be able to go back and look at different versions of that content. So in this case, when we connected to our OneDrive, there was a folder of this report which contained historical versions of that report. And I should be able to go in and flip back and look at that history, know it's all related together and not have to hunt for those spreadsheets. I should have access to the metadata here that we've just spoken about. So again, understand the context behind it. Even see things like maybe we document the content and in terms of help or release notes, I should be able to see that. If lineage is interesting, I should have access to the lineage of the content, where it comes from, where it's being sent out. We'll look at distributions in a minute and really get a view into this as if it was a Tableau dashboard or a Power BI dashboard. It should be no different though it's in Excel.
And I want to add, I think it may be sort of clear when Mike said it, but I just want to kind of emphasize here, we're not holding this spreadsheet. We didn't move that spreadsheet over. This spreadsheet continues to reside in the SharePoint where you put it, or in that shared drive. It's simply because of the synchronization. As soon as the new version's available in that location, we detect it, and then we capture the preview images here and we show it to you here. So there's no duplication or movement of content or anything like that. It's just a and as you saw Mike show you, the key was you only have to do that metadata once, and now as new versions show up, they're all in that drop down available for them, benefiting from that same amount of metadata.
Marius also spoke about sort of the collaborative aspect of this as well. So, if you think what happens today, spreadsheets, how do they get accessed? Well, they may be in a file share somewhere. I'll open it, I'll create a copy, I might send it around. I might put some comments into that email to explain what's going on. And all that context, excuse me, all that context gets lost. All that history of that context gets lost. So by bringing it together in a portal as well, as potentially an analyst or content publisher publishing this particular spreadsheet, I should be able to add my own commentary into this. We call it expert analysis in Metric Insights. For this version of the spreadsheet, add any sort of context that I want the users to understand, but also have the historical sort of context as well. So as new versions come out, as I add additional information, that should be available to the end users. And anyone sort of new to the organization coming in February should be able to go back and still retain the context of what existed and what was said about the historical data as well. So whether it's sort of the content publisher doing that, or whether it's enabling sort of end users as well to collaborate around this content, again, that would typically happen in email, and the context would be lost over time. We can memorialize that against the spreadsheets as a kind of viewed through the portal here in Metric Insights. So we give users access through those sort of tiles that we were looking at on the front screen. A marketing example, we published this this cash flow statement before, and I marked it as confidential as sort of the data classification of this. Marius talked about sort of the enforcement of policies around data as well. So if I know this contains confidential information, and I publish this and I send it around in email, I'm kind of relying on the end users to know that and know that they need to use that data appropriately. Well, if I publish it through a portal like this, then I should be able to communicate that to users and ultimately have them acknowledge that they do understand the usage policies around a particular piece of content. So in this case, we're showing an announcement on the content that requires them to go and click out and look at our usage policies around it, and even acknowledge that they've done that and that they're accepting the fact that they understand how this data is being used, so that I can sort of start to de-risk some of this policy. I can understand who's now seeing this report, and has everyone accepted the usage policies. I can chase them down if they haven't. So, no point governing content from a sort of sensitivity and policy perspective if you don't understand, or users don't understand how they should be using it. I don't think anyone typically is trying to misuse data, but you need to tell them, what those usage policies are. And we've talked a lot about sort of Excel. I'd argue that Excel isn't the only sort of end user content publishing tool out there. We create things like PowerPoint decks on an ongoing basis, whether it's for our weekly meetings or our board updates on a quarterly basis, that ultimately I would argue is BI as well, right? Oftentimes it contains data and it contains charts of information. And in the same way that you want to govern Excel, really you want to be able to govern any documents, any user-generated content that requires some level of governance in the same way that you do Excel and those other tools. And so, what we end up with in our BI portal here is that content that we've just looked at, sitting alongside things like your BI dashboards. So, in this case, I'm also pulling in a Tableau piece of content where, again, we're in exactly the same way. Maybe it's some different fields, but, ultimately we're governing it at the level that we need to govern it. And as a user, again, I shouldn't really care about the fact that in this case, I'm looking at a live Tableau dashboard, but, ultimately, I might want to go and look at, my ClickSense dashboard or my spreadsheet. If I'm looking at a piece of content here, I should be able to quickly navigate to any other content. So whether that, again, is the Tableau dashboard, or whether it's the Excel report that we were looking at before, or the monthly marketing report, to the end user, it shouldn't matter that that's Excel or Tableau or Power BI or whatever. The experience should be the same. So having everything under the same umbrella and governed in the same way is important. Secondly, then, having a consistent way of distributing that content as well. So today, versions of spreadsheets get sent round, on sort of an ad hoc basis, and there's very little tracking or governance around that. Well, from the portal, you should be able to set up the concept of a burst, of a distribution that puts together the content that you're interested in. And in metric insights, a burst is essentially a set of content that you want to push out to your end users. So in this case, I've pulled in a monthly marketing update spreadsheet alongside, maybe that Tableau dashboard that we were interested in. I should be able to put that on a schedule to distribute it, right? That's not something I can do in Excel. I'm doing it, relying on myself to remember to send this out via email. Well, by doing it through the portal, I can put it on a schedule. I can burst it out, in this case, to email. I can, most importantly, only send this email when things have updated. So, I don't want to be sending the same version around every time. I only want to send out this email when a new version of the spreadsheet is available to people. So I've got control over what gets sent out, and then ultimately who is going to receive that content. So Marius mentioned that typically we synchronize with things like Active Directory groups and LDAP structures. So, being able to leverage that to send out Excel content is important as well. So I can subscribe different users to this content. And if we quickly jump across to Gmail here to show you an example, go across to our demo account. The end result to a user is that they should be able to receive distributions that, maybe contain the spreadsheet that we've been looking at alongside other BI content like that Tableau dashboard. We may or may not want to attach the actual content as well, so that they can review it offline. Again, this is, sending a copy of that dashboard, but ultimately, sending them something that they can click back into and look at within the portal and consume it in a single place, as you would expect. And if we are going to distribute content like that financial report that we were looking at, again, making sure that policy is understood as well, whether I'm consuming this within the portal or via my email, I should understand those usage policies that we want people to adhere to. So, we've looked at governing and publishing in the portal. We've looked at distribution. When Marius talked about sort of the governance process, a big piece of it is then understanding usage and making sure that content remains relevant within the organization. And by publishing things into a centralized place and having users access that content there, we can track usage and start to gather feedback on it. So there's two things that we'll look at. One is, excuse me, one is who is looking at this content or who is receiving it via our distributions and emails. The second is giving people the opportunity to provide feedback on the content as well. And so, by accessing this within the portal, we can prompt users to provide feedback and rate the content in a subjective way. And again, this might happen on spreadsheets. It can also happen on all our BI content. but something not really possible in say Excel, where a user could come in and rate this content, give subjective feedback to it, and submit that back to the content publisher. When we collect feedback, as I mentioned, we're also collecting usage of this content, and usage is anyone coming to look at that dashboard or receiving it via email. And ultimately what we end up with is an ongoing sort of usage trend for this particular piece of content, alongside the ratings and the feedback that we get from the users. And so, on a regular basis, as a publisher of this content, I can use this to understand, how relevant it is still to the organization. Is it something that's still being used? Is it something we should look at updating? Is it something that we should retire because it's not being used anymore, and we don't need that spreadsheet out there? And that usage, again, is typically not looked at in a vacuum. It should be the same across all the content that we have within the organization. I should be able to look at usage, what's increasing in popularity, what's decreasing, what's going unused, whether it is that spreadsheet that we were looking at, or whether it is content coming from any other BI tool out there. So I think in summary, and we'll open this up for questions. You need to govern Excel or really any other documents that you have out there that you want to make available to the wider organization in a similar way to the way that you would govern your BI content, so that you can keep control, enforce policy, declutter your environments to just understand what people are using and what's useful to the business. So with that, I'm going to switch back to the slides here quickly. So let's stop sharing here, and let's open it up for questions. I think we've got a few come in here. So let me just share the other slide here, and then we will let's start looking at the questions, Marius. So first off, let's look at this one. So a question here is, isn't it impossible to govern all the Excel spreadsheets that exist in an organization?
Yeah, that's a great...
I would probably say yes, but go on, I'll let you answer that.
For sure, and I think that, nor should you try, right? I think that the point here is that I think you want to distinguish between different kinds of Excel content. There's, a spreadsheet that I create for myself or as an analyst, maybe as a one-time thing that I just share on an ad hoc basis with a small group of people. Well, that probably doesn't need necessarily to be governed, but if it is a user-generated reporting, if it's content that is being distributed to people on a regular basis, that is every single week or once a month or once a quarter, I'm creating this report and I'm sending out, that really fundamentally, from a consumption perspective, is no different than a BI tool deliverable that's created and that the user is looking at. So that is the thing that you want to put into governance. And this is the reason why in that process that we looked at, we noticed that we synced the content, but not everything got published. So you can go through and say, I've got all this stuff in SharePoint, but these are the things that really are being consumed on a regular basis, and they should be then moved into the governance platform. And these other things, let's leave where they are because they're a one-off things that we pushed out there.
Yeah, I think it's where you're using Excel or anything else as a BI tool, effectively, right? Where people are using it as a sort of individual analysis tool, as one-off sort of analysis, as you say, you're typically not. But if you are using it to create a report to distribute, that's really what it comes down to. So a question about how to get feedback, objective feedback, I guess, and vision that lead to creation of the Excel report. So I guess this is more around sort of feedback around what's created, but I think it probably relates to sort of gathering feedback. I think this was maybe asked before we looked at the feedback option.
Yeah, I assume so. But again, and you're going to be, Mike didn't go into this because we didn't only have so much time in the demo. But that particular feedback prompt they showed is configurable, so you can really ask whatever you want as a question. You can either get the numeric responses, NPS type score from 1 to 10 or not. So you can really think as either as an analyst or from a policy perspective, you can come up with the idea of here's the things I want to ask, put them in there, and then the system just prompts on a regular basis if people haven't provided feedback, in a non-annoying way, but not on every view, but every once in a while it'll ask you for feedback if you haven't provided any, and if you provide it, then it kind of goes away and doesn't come back and bug you again for a long time. So the idea is that you can set up a standard set of things like how useful do you find this report, or would you recommend this to a peer, or standard type NPS questions, and then apply it to the entire portfolio. So that's one strategy where it's more of a centralized governance model. Or you could allow your power users to come up with their own questions and designate those, and then those get asked of users. And there's throttles in the entire system to make sure that you're not asking the users feedback so often that they get turned off. Right? So it works well.
And to your point around sort of new content, like what are we missing, right? Gathering, sort of allowing users to sort of provide feedback at the sort of portal level. Not at the individual content level, has been used for things like, report requests, that sort of thing, where this would be useful if you created it.
So the two ways in which that plays out, what Mike just said, is that you either can, sometimes we've seen some of our customers will put like a little link at the top to request a report, click here, right? So it shows up in the portal, they click on that. The other thing that you can use towards guiding other reporting that's missing is, Mike kind of touched on it lightly, but we measure the usage, not only the usage of content, but when people are searching things, there's this global search capability, which we didn't have a chance to show in this demo, but you can search for the content where you're searching across all your BI tools, as well as as any spreadsheets that have been put into the system. And as part of that, we track whether the user, when they were searching on something, whether they found it. That is, whether they clicked on something to go onto. Was there a piece of content that was compelling enough that it matched their search criteria such that they went in to consume it? And so you can look at those searches where users were looking for things and did not end up finding anything, what we call unsuccessful searches. And that helps you understand, potentially maybe some reports that you need to build that don't already exist.
How do you define easy when it comes to making governance easy? I think you touched on this a little bit, but about just collecting what's necessary, right? I think some people over-engineer governance, right, based on the content.
Yeah, it's collect only the information that's necessary, no more, what Mike said, and then look at the process. How many clicks, how much time does it take for me to pull the item through the governance process? You saw it in our tool, but whatever you implement, just think about that. If that process for me to move my asset into a governed state takes more than a few minutes, really even more than 1 minute, right, then I would maintain it's probably too much time. So that has to be a very short interval. It has to be just really focused so that it almost feels effortless. And then another aspect of it, again, we don't really have time to show this, but you want to drive people to the governance actions. So if I told you, hey, you got to come to this portal to apply governance to your content, you might do it, but you probably won't remember to do it because you'll be very busy doing a lot of other things as a content publisher. So we need to drive you to that when there's content that needs to be put in there. So that syncing process, we might detect, hey, there's some new content out there that's been added to this particular area of the SharePoint site. The system can then notify the content publisher to say there's new stuff here that needs to be governed. Go give you a link directly to that. You click on that in the email. You go into the governance workflow in a minute, kind of put the necessary description, a few tags of information, hit the button. That's what easy should be, something that your content publishers are willing to accept as a amount of friction, as an amount of overhead in publishing, readily accepted given the benefits that are being returned. And that's really the test for that. What's the cost benefit for them?
Right. I think it's also critical to understand that sort of one size doesn't fit all, and you need to look at the content as well, right? So some content, maybe it shouldn't be that easy to govern, right? If it's highly sensitive information that's going out to the street or whatever, financial numbers, it should take a level of scrutiny and, maybe even multiple people looking at it before it gets published. However, there is other content that, just needs to get out there, and it should be simple and one click. So I think you need to think about it from a content perspective as well.
That's a great point. And you saw when Mike showed the demo, he showed a very simple workflow, but there are lots of other workflows possible. And what you do in an actual implementation for this kind of thing is you would do exactly what Mike said. You would align the type of content with the type of governance flow. So you'd have a multi-party certification workflow for things like your board reporting or your things that go to the street, where your analyst and your content publisher and your maybe a governance team and someone else is kind of reviewing it, and it's going through many hands, and so it's not a quick and easy thing. Each of them has a simplified process, but in total it's not. And then your process that is just users responsible for their own publishing can go through a much more lightweight process, like Mike showed you in the demo.
All right, I think we've got time for one more. How do you get people to transition to the new way of doing things? I guess new way being governing spreadsheets.
Yeah, that's obviously, this is a challenge because you've got people that are used to doing things a certain way. You're used to sending things via email. And I think that the answer to that is kind of is twofold. One is, of course, the socialization that should take place around the benefits and the value. So this is not again, governance initiatives are sold as you must do this, and no matter what, tend to not be very successful if they require a lot of effort. But those that generate value for the publisher are much more successful. So selling the value and building the benefit is one way. The second thing is, though, it is useful if you can start kind of from the top down, right? So if your management team can, and the management team has a built-in stakeholder interest in making sure things are properly governed, right? They're the ones who sign on that Sarbanes-Oxley reports, or and basically are accountable if there's if information's used improperly. So if you get them to agree to say, hey, you know what, if I'm only going to consume spreadsheets that I'm accessing the portal, then I know are governed, right? If they set that as the standard for the organization, then that will drive compliance. Because if everyone knows that, well, in order for my management team to consume this, I need to post it into this governed environment. Now all of a sudden it will happen. So I think you can use both of those strategies together to get a broad-based compliance and adoption.
Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. I hope this was interesting. You can always reach out to us at the email addresses here. Again, this will be available to review on the channel. I saw a couple of questions about sort of going back to particular screens, but if you want to take a look on the channel, you'll be able to sort of flip through the recording and see what you needed to see. But thanks for joining us, and look forward to presenting to you again in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.